morning, everyone. Our first reading is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verses 1 to 15. Very early in the morning, the chief priests, with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans. So they bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "You have said so," Jesus replied. The chief priests accused him of many things. So again, Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of." But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. Now it was the custom at the festival to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of self-interest that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests still stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked them. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. This is the word from the Lord.
Good morning, everyone. Our second reading is taken from Mark chapter 15, verses 16 to 32. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is, the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spat on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it, and they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. This is the word of the Lord.
We're going to continue.
Chapter 15, verses 33 to 38. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. And at 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes down to take him down," he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last breath. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom.
Every now and then, there are moments in time that change the course of human history. In the late 1800s, Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show was touring America with exhibitions of horsemanship and gunslinging, and one of the most popular acts on the program was Phoebe Moses, Annie Oakley, who was quite the markswoman. She could take her gun, aim, and shoot a coin tossed in the air. She could hit the edge of a playing card at 30 feet. She could snuff out a candle with a bullet. She could shoot a cork out of a bottle. But the grand finale of her show was to get someone up on stage, put a cigarette in their mouth, go to the back of the room and shoot the cigarette out of their mouth. And she would call for a volunteer. And every time, her husband Frank in the audience was first with his hand up, and he would come forward. In 1887, the Wild West show toured Europe, and Oakland Annie did her thing. And then she said, "For my grand finale, I'm going to call for a volunteer to put a cigarette in their mouth. I'm going to go to the back of the hall, and I'm going to shoot the cigarette out of his mouth." And before Frank could put his hand up, a young German shot to his feet and strode to the front, pulled out his own cigarette and declared he was ready. This was one of the last nights of the Wild West show travelling Europe. Bill and Frank and Annie had gone out the night before to celebrate, so she wasn't feeling quite at the top of her game, so the history books say. And it wasn't Frank she's aiming a gun at. As she walked to the back of the hall, she is willing her breath to slow, her heart rate to slow, willing the tremble in her hand to still. She takes aim and shoots the cigarette out of Crown Prince Wilhelm's mouth. Crown Prince Wilhelm went on to become Kaiser Wilhelm, who led Germany into World War I. How history might have changed if a slight tremor in her hand or miscalculation had taken place. Perhaps no World War I, 20 million lives possibly saved. Hitler wouldn't have emerged from the ashes of a defeated Germany. Lenin wouldn't have overthrown a demoralised Russian government. One shot could have changed the future for millions and billions of people. And today, we are going to reflect on two men and one shot. The two men are Pontius Pilate and Jesus Christ. And the one shot is yours to take today. The religious mob, as we heard, as Mark has been our guide through the events of that first Good Friday in Jerusalem. The religious mob had arrested Jesus. They wanted him dead, but had to bring him to the Roman governor, as only Rome could order the death penalty. So they brought Jesus to Pilate, and Mark tells us, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked him. "It is as you say," came the reply. Then Jesus' accusers piled onto him. But Jesus said nothing. which is what the prophet Isaiah predicted when he described the life of Jesus 700 years earlier, when he wrote of the coming of the servant of the Lord. I'm hoping that's going to advance to the next slide. This is what Isaiah wrote of the servant of the Lord. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Just let that sink in a moment. 700 years earlier, Jesus' trial before Pilate was predicted. This and so much more of the detail of the first Easter prophesied. Now, just in case you think I am making this up and your worldview doesn't allow room for such detailed, accurate predictions of the future, not now, definitely not now, but when you go home, Google Great Scroll of Isaiah, and you'll find images of a complete copy of the Old Testament book of Isaiah, which this particular document dates back to at least 125 BC. And it's a copy of a copy of a copy of what Isaiah wrote 700 BC. So at least 125 years before Jesus was born, the detailed circumstances of his birth, his life, his teachings, his miracles, his trial before Pilate, his crucifixion, his burial, and his resurrection were all predicted. And so if your worldview doesn't allow room for such detailed, accurate predictions of the future, may I respectfully suggest it's time for an upgrade. Every year at Jewish Passover, Pilate had a tradition of releasing a prisoner back to the Jews, perhaps as a way to keep the peace during this religious festival. And there was another man on death row that day, Barabbas, a notorious criminal guilty of murder and insurrection. And the mob, whipped up by Jesus' accusers, called for the release of Barabbas instead of Jesus. And so Pilate asked, well, what shall I do then with the one you call King of the Jews? Crucify him. Why? What crime has he committed? Mark tells us the crowd shouted all the louder, crucify him. Now, if we were to flick back through Mark's gospel, this rank injustice should not take us by surprise. Jesus told his disciples time and again that he came to die, to take on himself the consequences of our dismissal of God, of our living as though we were God. And we know that Jesus claimed to be God. He called himself the Son of God. He called on God as his Father. And to prove that he is one with God the Father in heaven, Jesus did the things that only God should be able to do. And he told his followers that he came to take our sins away. And he would do that by dying. So if you're here at church and you know nothing else about Jesus, that's all you need to know for the moment. But there's something else you need to know about Barabbas. Barabbas was a Jew, and his name, Bar-Abbas, means son of the Father. And he's standing along Jesus, the Christ, the Son of God the Father. So we've got two blokes in front of Pilate. Barabbas, a violent criminal and murderer, and Jesus, a man who is completely innocent. And as Pontius Pilate looked at these two men, Barabbas, son of a father and guilty as sin, and Jesus, son of God the Father and completely innocent, Pilate had a decision to make. He had one shot. And Mark tells us in verse 15 that was read to us, wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. And he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. I have a friend who is a pastor in London, and in 2007, one of his parishioners invited him to one of those fancy clubs in London. Maybe you could do the same for your pastor. Invited him to a fancy club in London for lunch, and he got there early. And at about 5 to 1, another young man in his early 20s in a suit came in, and they both stood in the foyer waiting, just sheepishly looking at the ground. At 1 o'clock on the dot, a man came through a side door and said, there you are, William. We're in the private dining room today. And my friend said, I was standing in front of Prince William, my future king, and I failed to recognise him. Pilate failed to recognise Jesus. Pilate had his one shot, and he missed. And I say that because Jesus Christ is the most impressive person you could ever meet. And he is the perfect gentleman. He's not going to force himself on you. He gives each person exactly what they ask for. If you just want to come to church at Easter, and we'll have a lovely service, we'll share bread and wine at the Lord's table, and if you just want to go on your way and keep Jesus at arm's distance, he is the perfect gentleman. He will give you arm's distance forever. But if you want a relationship with him, if you want a relationship with him now, he will give you a relationship forever. I mentioned earlier I love my rugby league and I love State of Origin. And I remember going back 10 years or so, Phil Gould, the Channel 9 commentator, would stand on the ground under the goalpost before the players would run out, and that the Channel 9 cameras would revolve around him, and he'd sort of revolve around and he would talk and he would give some sort of motivational, inspirational speech before the teams ran out, and you could see the crowds just waiting for kickoff. And one year he said, straight down the barrel of the camera, Origin, one moment that echoes into eternity. Now I have just two observations to make. Number one, I think he stole that from Russell Crowe in Gladiator. And number two, it's complete bollocks. Rugby league is just a game. It will not echo into eternity. There is only one decision that will echo into eternity, and that is your response to the man who claimed to be God, whose life was predicted centuries in advance by the Old Testament, who did the things only God can do, who said he would die to deal with all the wrong that we have done, all the guilt, all the shame that lies in your past, and he would reconcile us to God forever. Pontius Pilate came face to face with Jesus Christ on that first Good Friday and dismissed him. He had his one shot at glory, and he missed. Friends, today is a great day for us to recalibrate our hearts, our minds, our ambitions, our desires, our lives around Jesus. You know how the first Easter played out. We heard in our progressive Bible readings that at midday, Jesus, after an agonising and humiliating parade through Jerusalem out to Skull Hill, a natural rise that separated the city of Jerusalem from its garbage dump that was perpetually smouldering with putrid, acrid smoke. And there he was nailed to a cross at the hands of a Roman death squad. And at 3 p.m, he died. The Son of God died a real death, was laid in a real tomb, and then, on the third day, and we had the spoiler alert, didn't we, in the kids' talk, he really came back to life. Now, Easter proves a couple of things. Number one, it proves that Jesus is who he said he is. Jesus' death and resurrection is the ultimate look at the scoreboard moment. He is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He commands your allegiance, your trust, and he is worthy of it. The second thing Easter proves, among many others, it proves that Jesus' death took, that it worked, that sin's price was paid in full, that death has been defeated, that death and the grave will no longer have the last word. We heard, didn't we, in our reading, verse 38 of Mark 15, when Jesus died, the curtain in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. This curtain was as thick as a mattress, and it was designed to stop sinful people like you and me from coming from the temple proper into the place in the temple where God himself dwelt in perfect holiness. And only once a year could the high priest go behind the curtain in the presence of God and make a sacrificial offering for the sins of all the people. But with Jesus' death, all that separated us from God, our sins, were heaped onto him, and he paid the price in full. The Bible says the wages of sin is death. Sin, our defiance of God, rebelling against God, not letting him occupy his rightful first place in our heart, that pays off with death. And because Jesus is perfect, he didn't need to die for his sins. And that means his death could count in place of the death of another. And if Jesus is just a man, then I bags Jesus died for me and you lot are on your own. But because Jesus is not just 100% human, but also 100% God, that means his death can count in place of an infinite number of people and their infinite number of sins, even yours. So the bad news of Good Friday is that you are going to pay an eternal price for your rejection of God, your sin. But the great news of Good Friday is that Jesus died so you might live, receive life to the full now and life forever with him in heaven, where there is maximum joy forever. And if someone can offer you a better deal than maximum joy forever, my earnest recommendation is you take it. But if it's anything less than maximum joy forever, you say no deal, because I got something better in the Son of God who died for me. The curtain has been torn in two. The way to God is open before you today. You have one shot. So are you going to respond to Jesus with gratitude, with sorrow for what lies in your past, and trust for what he did for you? You have one shot, and your response to Jesus is the only moment that will echo into eternity. See from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did e'er such love and sorrow meet? Or thorns compose so rich a crown? Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were an offering far too small? Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all.